Okay, here we go again. Just a reminder that as you have questions, come on in, please. As you have questions, don't forget to turn on your mics that are on your desk.
Oh, and you have to put the push the push button, because I realized last session I was talking into the mic and it wasn't on.
Yeah, you have to actually hit the button, and then your mic is on, and away we go. You know, so we get these new technologies, and we realize how cool they are, and usually it seems the case that the technology comes before the content application for it. And so we've got the technology, and then we leave it up to creative minds to figure out how do we use that technology. And it always seems to me that the technology ends up being used in ways that the inventor did not intend. And I think that's what innovation is. We've got the innovation, we've got the inventions, and then the innovation is when you take those inventions and you use them in ways that the inventor never conceived of. For instance, don't we all love the person who invented the wheel? I mean, God, the wheels are wonderful. And of course, suitcases. Yeah, love them. I love better the person who put wheels on suitcases. You know, that's the innovation. That's the cool thing. Taking those two inventions and putting them together in ways that somebody never imagined, neither creator imagined. Well, that's why we're here talking about museums today, because I think there's a lot that any of us who tell stories can learn about museums who clearly for decades or centuries have been in really the storytelling business in addition to the information business. And what Susan, who is the first digital director of a museum in the US, what she did is to show us, particularly with their you're going to show the warriors, with the terracotta warriors, how they used augmented reality to really expand that museum experience. Susan has experience as the digital director for National Geographic, as the social media director for AOL at the time when your record was how many hundreds of thousands of people in a chat room?
It was a lot.
Yeah. And that was that Brittany, or was that?
That was a long time ago.
Yeah,
yeah, Britney Spears.
You know, literally hundreds of thousands of people in a chat room. So. Those are among her experiences, and now she's applying all that knowledge of both content and audience and new technology to museums. Thank you, Susan Poulton.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Gary. Gary was my news mentor at AOL, so everything I know about journalism I learned from him. For good and bad. No, I'm just kidding. As Gary mentioned, I'm the Chief Digital Officer at the Franklin Institute, which is a big science museum in Philadelphia. Who here knows of the Franklin Institute? Hey, did you grow up in Jersey, Philly? Where? Anywhere?
Jersey, Delaware.
Nice. Got it. Yeah, we're real famous on the East Coast in a very small group of states. The coolest story just recently, Steven Spielberg came by the Franklin Institute. Comcast booked him in a private off-site meeting in our boardroom. And we knew somebody famous was coming, and we all thought it was Mark Zuckerberg. I may have started that rumor. But it turned out all of a sudden Steven Spielberg walks past my office. And when they met him at the front door of the museum, he insisted on being taken to the Baldwin locomotive, which is this big train that we have. And he took a selfie and he sent it to his whole family. Because guess what? Franklin Institute was Steven Spielberg's childhood science museum. He grew up in Jersey, and the very first film he ever made at 12 years old was based on our Baldwin locomotive, which I didn't actually believe, and then I Wikipedia'd it. We all know it's true. It is actually true. So museums was a departure for me. I had spent 10 years at AOL doing a whole variety of content creation, and then 8 years as VP of Digital for National Geographic. Social media was invented while we were there, so it was a real honor to work on some of the very early National Geographic digital properties. And I had taken some time off to do some consulting and then really wanted to jump back in full time. And I was kind of like, got this offer, and I was like, museums? Huh. So what do you think of when you think of museums? What's the first thing that comes to your mind when you think of a museum?
Dinosaur.
Dinosaurs. In many ways. Anybody? Anything? Do you have a particular museum you loved? A memory of a museum? Recent? Anybody want to share? You think of them as very modern places?
I do.
Yeah?
I really think they push barriers when it comes to immersive experiences.
Excellent.
And wayfinding.
Yep.
Getting lost in the American Museum of Natural History.
That's a big one. We actually modeled our wayfinding system after them because that became one of the biggest things they had to solve for, which was how showing people the exits to the AM and H. Yes, wandering around. So a lot of folks think of I think some museums, more recently than others, are doing a better job of it, but they're not often perceived as being very digitally forward, I think. I did not realize how far behind they were until I went to work at one. So why are museums important? Museums are important for a whole variety of reasons that I think are becoming more and more clear today. And I obviously look at this as a non-museum person. I'm not a museum curator. I don't come from that world. But museums have been in the content creation and distribution business for hundreds of years. We are trusted sources of information, which is really important given that, and we're in an information crisis right now. We're not in, an era of distrust in we're in an information crisis right now, whether you want to admit it or not. People do not know how to get their information, where to get it, who to trust. It's all over the place. And if we don't start to right this ship, we're in big trouble. They have very little experience with emerging technologies for a variety of reasons. Some of it's funding, some of it's experience of the staff. They have very little experience with real-time storytelling and relevant reactionary content. So the example I give, The Brain is our most recent exhibition, took 8 years to create. It's been open for 4 years. It's 12 years old, and the content has not changed on the walls. But we're in this amazing space where we're at the intersection of digital and place-based experiences. So this is what really intrigued me about doing digital at a museum. So museums, there's a lot of words up here, but I'll just summarize. Museums have, audiences are going to start to expect more from museums. Museums, as of 2 years ago, were extremely anti-mobile phones. The mobile phone had no place. In fact, a good percentage of museums actually still banned mobile phones and photography in museums as of only 2 or 3 years ago. So we've come a long way in just a short period of time, but audiences are going to expect to interact with their environment in a digital way. And if museums don't get there, we basically become glorified daycare centers for where you take your kids on rainy days. Or where you go just to get out of the house. We're not actually serving the core need that we can be. Science and technology and delivery mechanisms of content are just going to grow at an exponential rate continually. And museums sticking a sign on a wall is not going to cut it. It's just not going to get you there. So we have to evolve. And relevancy and immediacy. So how people learn is not like, that's not how people learn. We learn on our phones, we learn here, we learn there, we learn from headlines, we learn all over the place. And timing it to things we know about. So why can't our earthquake exhibition, or I'm Changing Earth, have content about the Mexico earthquake that just happened? So not only are we informing the public about the Mexico earthquake, we then pair that with relevant science content, and it's gonna stick more because it's something they just learned about. We're pairing the information with something they just learned about. But how you do that is really tricky. So these emerging trends are ones that we have jumped on in the last 2 years. Virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality. Explaining this, by the way, to donors and grantees and applying for grants for this stuff, that's a whole other ball of wax. It's hard enough just to get my boss to understand it. The Internet of Things, so this physical merging of the digital and the physical. Artificial intelligence and machine learning, this is going to be a big one. Messaging platforms and voice-activated delivery, and then how all these data sets and data algorithms populate information within the museum. Add to that the really fun-based, place-based mobile tech. So this is the stuff that I have really enjoyed rounding out my digital experience. I'd always done online publishing. Now I know things about beacons and indoor wayfinding and NFC tags. Does anybody know what an NFC tag is? Yeah, near field communication tags. So they were dormant. It's like QR codes. Everybody thinks QR codes and NFC tags were a failure. They were a failure because the device didn't have the capability to read it. iOS 11 has the capability to read NFC tags. Interestingly enough, museums are 70% iPhone, 30% Android. Doesn't matter the museum, doesn't matter the content matter, doesn't matter the city, doesn't matter the country. Isn't that fascinating? Everywhere you go, 70-30. I didn't believe that. Then I've launched 2 apps, and it is 70, I mean, it might be 69.8, 31, but it is 70-30. Nothing we've done is not 70-30 on mobile, iPhone, Android. And that includes international, which is shocking because the Android penetration overseas is so much higher, but London Museum of Science. So there's an intersection between who goes to cultural places and the demographic of iPhone users. Geofencing, the ability to show somebody something when I know when beacons are when somebody's in the brain, and I know when they're in the heart, and I know when they're somewhere else, and I can custom tailor what's on their device and what's appearing on their device. Using augmented reality to get people to use their mobile device to engage with content. How does your mobile device do customer service? And how do we start to intersect customer service with learning and information? All this content interactions, how not just take a photo, take a selfie and tag the museum, but these are things we haven't even talked about yet. How do exhibition designers and space designers get together and say, how would we let somebody use their device to explore this space and actually become a part of the art and become a part of this statue or become a part of this exhibition? Membership. Museums have built-in memberships. So when we're looking at subscription models for content, we have built-in membership models. We don't have to, being a member of a museum is something that people, have in their head. How do we offer exclusivities for members via mobile device and, versus other visitors? And content targeting, being able to, this is where it starts to get really scary. So with this beacon content and Wi-Fi networks in a place-based environment, when you walk in the door and you have your phone in your pocket and you do not connect to the Wi-Fi system in my building, I know all kinds of stuff about you. I know what phone you're on, I know what device you're on, I know if it's an Android or an iPhone. I know a little bit about where you live just because of the information that's stored. So as soon as your phone starts pinging Wi-Fi networks, we get all this data. We're only a little bit away from me knowing a little bit more about you so that when you're walking past a wall, the content is actually tailored to you personally versus just being in the room. It's really fascinating where these intersections are going in place-based mobile tech. So our digital strategy goals at the Franklin Institute. So I'm just going to blow really quickly through what the last 2.5 crazy years have been like for me, because I would really like to get into a discussion with you guys about questions you have about place-based, mobile. I'm happy to answer VR, AR, the whole ball of wax. As Gary mentioned, one of the things that I can definitely tell you about is practical applications of those environments. I have put 85,000 people through virtual reality in the last year, thanks to Dan. He introduced me to it, and it's made my life a living hell. But it's great. Visitors love it. But I put 85,000 people through it, so I know who throws up. I know if anyone gets pink eye. Yeah.
Sorry, so how did
Could you use the mic?
Oh, yeah, and push the button. There you go.
I'm really interested in that, and congratulations, by the way. So how did you keep people entertained while they were waiting for their experience?
So it's kind of interesting. They kind of entertain themselves. I was really worried about that, and one of the things that we discovered with virtual reality is people will wait for VR much longer than they will wait for other experiences in the museum. So they'll get irritated at waiting in line for a movie, but VR, they don't seem to tire. The line will get really, really long, and we were kind of like, oh, do we have to place docents to kind of keep them engaged? They didn't mind. And I was like, they're waiting this long to see a 2-minute demo version of the blue whale on HTC Vive. And they loved it. So these were perception busters for us, where we thought it was not going to be enough for the payoff. And very little goes a very long way with the average public, I think. And so one of the things we do is we simulcast out. You'll see a photo coming up. We simulcast out what people are seeing in the headset. So even if you're standing in the back of the line, you can be like, oh, look, there's going to be a whale coming up behind you. So they get a sense of what's to come, which is kind of helpful. So this was the framework for the digital strategy that we created at the Franklin Institute. So One, it has to support and enhance the day-to-day core museum business. But we wanted to see if we could tackle a national and global audience for the Franklin Institute. Could we build some stuff that was so cool, it kind of catapulted us as a leader among museums and also within the eyes of the public? So we're doing a lot of benchmarking surveys. Franklin Institute, you know, a lot of people, oh, I love the giant heart, it's so great. We get a kind of like a dusty sign, like the fact that Steven Spielberg came back after 50 years and the train was still there and it probably looked exactly the same as it did when he was 12. Maybe that's not such a good thing. Like it's great for the, pulling at the heartstrings and getting people to be lifelong donors, but probably not great. So how could we catapult ourselves ahead? But I was really fascinated at confronting some of the core challenges museums face with digital. So I go around and I talk at a lot of museum conferences, and I get right in people's faces, because museums really don't want to change. They are very, very committed to not changing. And they come up with every reason in the book to not do it. And you kind of have to break down those barriers and show them it's not expensive, it's not hard, nobody gets pink eye. The example, I always get this with VR. Everyone, who's going to, MRSA and pink eye, especially when I'm putting little kids through it. And the example I always give at conferences is one time I was walking through the museum, and we have this big pendulum staircase that goes down like 4 floors, and I once watched a kid lick the railing from the top to the bottom, the whole railing. And everyone's like, well, why is that relevant? I was like, if you might get pink eye from the Franklin Institute, but you're not getting it from VR. I push all the elevator buttons with my knuckles. Like, I get like 9 flu shots a year. And so also, I think this was really curious. You're looking at a VR strategy or an AR strategy, embracing what your best chance of immediate success is. So we had a lot of things we could have done, but some of them were going to be really expensive to do really well. And so we really looked for things that were easy entry points that people weren't doing. It's why we did VR first and not AR, because very few museums were doing VR. So we were able to get a lot of headlines, a lot of partnerships. If we'd gone into the AR space, we were kind of swimming an uphill battle. So what we did was learn from that, and now we're going into AR and learning from what people did before us coming into that space. And then being us, like what was different about us than somebody else. So our mobile app goals, very quickly. The phone is not a distraction. That was my #1 thing. That is, we're discovering a little bit of a personal choice, and you'll never combat that. So the augmented reality experience with Terracotta Warriors, people said, I just didn't want to use my phone. I came to this exhibit to not use my phone. Totally okay. You're not trying to bring everybody along. If people are coming to a space to unplug, you can't fight that. But it's not curators were like, the example I used to give is that curators treated the mobile phone like a spoiled teenager at the dinner table. Put that phone away, you're being rude, and enjoy what I have created for you. It's like, yeah, that's not how it works. No one downloads museum apps. Everybody said that to me, and I said, well, that's because you're making crappy apps and you're not telling anybody you have them. And beyond their visit, I mean, this was probably the biggest one for place-based experiences. Why? Why download a native app? You might come to the museum twice a year. Why download a native app for something you're going to do twice a year? So how can place-based apps do more than just enhance your visit? So we created a geo-fenced app that is one app offsite and one app onsite, and the beacons know when you walk through the door, and it switches over. Virtual reality. We wanted to position ourselves as a leader among museums, that we were doing this and nobody else was. This was probably the biggest one, the second, and this has become the most powerful for doing it, is an out-of-home VR market and creating an out-of-home VR market. So obviously all this money went into VR and all this content got created, and now no one's using it because not everybody bought them and put them in their basement. So the biggest piece of feedback, Business Intelligence just did a survey with the public on their thoughts on VR. 79% still haven't had a chance to try it yet. This is not something everybody's done. Google Cardboard, not everybody's tried that. HTC Vive, not everybody's tried that. So what I can offer content developers and mobile apps is distribution. I have 800,000 people of all various ages. I offer every single content experience. We'll take care, I have a mobile app with a VR library. We'll take care of the distribution, you just give me content, and it's a perfect merger. And is it the 200 million followers I had at National Geographic? No. Is it 800,000 captive people who can take an intercept survey as they're walking out? You bet. And that is incredibly valued. So now I've got all of these huge media creators coming and saying, we'll do anything, take our can we create a special version for you? What does it take? I'm like, bring it. So having, being able to establish museum audiences as that place for VR was really key. And augmented reality, this gets a little bit more like how do you start to layer digital on the physical? It's a little bit less of a novelty than VR. Standalone, like the VR at art is a standalone experience. You go up, you have a 3-minute VR experience, and you walk away. AR is really where you're starting to build out digital content on top of an exhibition. So we really wanted to understand how that works, how we can use like bringing items in our collection. So with the SF MoMA app, if you were in the bots, we're trying to mimic that with our collection, where you type an emoji, and none of our collection, we have this amazing collection, and none of it's on the floor. So how do we surface that? So the idea we had is the empty glass case. And so in our atrium, there's going to be a massive empty glass case, and you have to download our mobile app. And there's a 3D object in that case every day. And but you download our mobile app and you hold it up to a target that's hidden inside the glass case. Oh, and there's a 3D skull, or there's an object, and you can explore it with your phone. So expanding, getting people to use their device to get curious about different things. Artificial intelligence and bots, we're creating a chatbot for our app. Both a customer service, this is huge for place-based experiences using customer service bots. Especially if you're a small museum, we have 800,000 visitors a year and 1 customer service person. So they're really excited about this. But also, how do digital assistants integrate? Like, we were thinking, could you put Amazon Echoes all over the building? And you just walk up to a wall and go, Alexa, where's the bathroom? I don't know. We might try it and see what happens. Can you attach an Alexa to our wayfinding system? Maybe. That's the fun stuff that we're starting to think about, is how all these technologies intersect in the building. And some are utter failures, and they really don't map to what visitors need and want, and you kind of have to try that. And museums, again, don't like to experiment. They don't like to try. It's a little scary. So here's just in a nutshell what we did over the last 2 years. We launched a native mobile app with 3D indoor wayfinding, ticketing, membership, VR library. We created a massive virtual reality infrastructure. So we have an app that is basically the New York Times VR app, but for science. I can add 400, just using Drupal, I can add 400 different VR videos in there. I don't have to talk to an app developer. Creation of augmented reality infrastructure. Again, instead of a one and done AR, we actually built an AR content management system. So I can make hundreds of AR experiences. Our museum programs group can create an AR scavenger hunt for an exhibition. And this was really key. Museums and other places like to build one and done. Oh, we launched an AR app. Well, okay, what do you do with it now? And you got to build infrastructure or it's not going to go anywhere. Hired a video and multimedia person on staff, which was kind of crazy. For that starting to get, digital teams at museums are starting to get, grow in size as they start to see that those are needs they need in-house, especially for social media. We built an infrastructure using API.ai for voice-activated delivery. Alexa, we had an intern build an Alexa app. He was so excited that we hired him, and he just said, I would like to build you an Alexa app. We were like, great, here's a few $100s. Social media for museums. This is an aside from mobile and sort of the device-based stuff, but when I first joined the museum, I did a survey of all museums in the world, and they all suck at social. It was really remarkable. None of them had sizable audiences. And so we had only 56,000 followers on Facebook when I started in fall of 2015. And now we're scheduled to top 500,000 by the end of the year, and we're the 9th largest museum in the world on Facebook. That includes the Louvre. So little tiny Franklin Institute, if you just put a little time and energy into it to grow that audience. And then we started to put some facility improvements in. So installing 200 beacons, we had to completely upgrade our Wi-Fi system. Charging stations, people are really freaked out because these things drain your battery life completely. So if you're going to do this in any kind of a play space, you got to have a charging station or some sort of charging solution. Charging lockers are even better because oftentimes you'll see families will come and one person will put their phone in the locker and they'll use the other person's phone as they go through. And so having charging lockers, charging stations all over the building, readily accessible, you can buy chargers. So we're investing in December to have a whole slew of charging experiences, like in our cafe, like just lighting that up as a charging station for devices, which seems really obvious, but had never really been done. So the mobile app, as I mentioned, has 3D indoor wayfinding, scannable stored membership cards, your daily schedule, ticketing, food, parking. One of the biggest takeaways for place-based apps that I learned from AM&H, actually, don't bury the lead. Number one thing they're looking for is bathrooms. Put bathrooms at the top. If you download AM&H's app, with all the great content they have, bathrooms is in their global nav. We're launching in phase 2, AR, artificial intelligence, calendaring, and now we're getting into games and interactive. So motivating people, we're playing with some messenger sticker sets. So this is more just throwing things against the wall, and then next year we get to see what works. These are just some shots of our mobile app. Feel free to download it. There's 2 of us now, Terracotta Warriors and then the Franklin Institute. So our VR strategy, I'm just going to run through in 2 seconds. We were the first museum I discovered to actually have a strategy. I don't do things that aren't planned out like this, so I just sort of stumbled into this. But it was really a life cycle of VR. So we have a mobile app with a science VR library, then so you come to the museum, you experience museum either in our holodeck or in a pop-up experience. You can download our mobile app. We give you a free Google Cardboard, and then you leave and go keep experiencing it at home. That worked a little bit until I found out how expensive it was to order 800,000 Google Cardboards. So I have 15,000 in the basement. Just give them out in little bits. But that was the concept, covering all the bases. So generally, if there's a headset that's available on the market, we buy it. Dan usually sends it to me and I buy it. So every time I see him at a conference, I now have 10 more things to buy. But if it's a headset, so these are kind of agnostic spaces. So this was our holodeck, and it's a technology agnostic space. It's just got a computer on either side. So that's what I love this. That's what we drew it up as. So this is really neat for me. I'm a digital person. I'd never done anything involving spackle. And so this was one of the coolest things that I have ever worked on. And for the museum exhibition, they were like, it's just a railing. I was like, oh my God, the railing's going in. And they just thought I was a complete nut job because I thought this was the coolest thing since sliced bread. And this is what it actually wound up looking like. So what's amazing, we run the tethers up to the ceiling. We have a guest services staff manning each side. People line up in a kiosk out the front. But I can, so one Oculus Rift, see the guy sitting on the left, and then HTC Vive. I believe we may be one of the only places in the world that has them side by side because they're direct competitors. You can't get that. It is absolutely fascinating. The line is outside the Vive. We can't pay people to sit in the Rift because it's a seated experience. And they do exactly what that guy's doing. They sit there and they stare at their feet. It's amazing. You're just like, move. It's 360. The other thing we do with this experience, which I've only just learned is totally revolutionary, we didn't sign any deals with Oculus or HTC, so I put all ages through this. I've put a kid as young as 4 in the Vive. So their regulations say 13 and older. Our lawyers say there's no evidence that a 2 to 3 minute experience is harmful for kids. So as long as the headset fits on your head and your parents say it's okay, we put you through it, and they love it. When we restricted it to 13 and over, no one used it. Well, one, because we're a family museum, so kids are usually the decision makers about what parents are going to go do, and if their kids can't do it, they're not going to do it. So we made it a whole family thing, and we've learned a ton, and that's been really fascinating. I've told a lot of content developers, because they don't feel comfortable testing on kids. I was like, we do. Come try your content in there and see what happens. Nobody throws up. That's another, people who are motion sick self-select. This is a big place-based thing that I've learned. People self-select. They just don't do it if they don't want to, or if they think they're going to be ill. So we did these pop-up VR carts. So this was an experiment to see, could you insert topical VR inside of a core exhibition space? So our design team came up with this really fascinating little cart idea. It's got 10 slots for 10 headsets, 10 devices that charge, sanitary wipes, because we do wipe everything down in between uses, and then 10 little stacking stools, and it rolls and it moves around. So this is a super cheap way. I buy, these are not Samsung Gear VRs, I buy, they're called iDoo-Doo, I love it. I buy them off Amazon for 20 bucks a pop in bulk. And they take any phone and they give you a basic, and so we show our app content in these. So this is, we have a cart in the brain, we have a cart in the heart, and we have a cart in Space Command. And here they're looking at 3D imagery of heart content. Here they're looking at brain tumors, and in there they're all the NASA. So we're the only one with all 26 of NASA's VR. Actually, NASA presented us at South by Southwest because they don't have a VR app, but we do with all their content. So they were like, if you want to see all our content, go to the Franklin Institute. So you see how visitors engage with it on the floor. And this was a big launch event that we did, which was hugely well attended. Dan is in one of these, I think, the next shot. But what we were trying to do was show to the public, and we used the museum to showcase all the various, so we had people from Temple and Drexel doing medical training. This was a kind of a hack of the Oculus. Bless you. We had, there's Dan. And then surgical training. So we had drone VR. We had a lot of really fascinating. This event, we weren't quite sure. We didn't plan it very well or let the public know. 2,000 sold out in 15 hours. So it was hugely popular with the public, VR as a topic. This is one of my favorite photos because it was banners on the front of the building. I never had that for a project I'd worked on. Like, I've done stuff on the front page of Nat Geo, and I was so excited when banners and billboards went up around Philadelphia for this project because, again, the museum's like, you're nuts. But it was really cool. We just launched Terracotta Warriors. So if you go fi.edu mobile, it's, so this is a multi-phase. So this was our first foray into AR. And what you do is you go up to the Terracotta Warrior statues. We have 10 of them on site. And you hold your mobile phone up and you see their weapons digitally recreated in their hands. And it pops a 3D, so we had the model scanned in high resolution photogrammetric detail, and then also had the models of their weapon recreated. Then we added this fun little thing, which was more of an off-site experience, which is called Mobile Warriors. And it's just like how it is in Snapchat. You can just pose the warriors in various places and take a photo and share it on social. So we've been doing a challenge with a bunch of museums. Smithsonian Natural History Museum sent us a photo of them guarding the Hope Diamond. So a bunch of museums have been doing that, and that's slowly starting to pick up. But again, that was looking at this off-site, on-site. How do we not just make this a throwaway thing for the exhibition, or they get used to it off-site and then they come and they do something on-site. So how is it an actual driver for a museum visit? Fascinatingly enough, an exhibition-driven AR experience is 21% conversion rate. 21% of the people who come download it. On our day-to-day app, only 3% is the conversion rate. So we've got some work to do on letting people know it's there. But it was successful for us. When we talk about catapulting us and using new technologies to get attention and positioning in the industry, we got a lot of amazing coverage on our virtual reality launch and augmented reality. In fact, if you're flying American here, we're in the back of the American Way, the American Airlines magazine. The AR is in there. And then New York Times Science wrote this amazing piece about everything we had gone through, kind of the combination of how we worked with curators and how we worked with digital modelers to recreate the warrior weapons. So I think, my key takeaways, and I just want to throw it out to the group for questions and comments. Don't underestimate museums. I did, and I think I overestimated their digital capabilities, but underestimated their importance in society. And I think they are, I'm really, really fascinated about plunging museums into journalistic content creation. I think they are content creators and can become journalists and become very trusted sources. We've been asked by Alexa to be a first-party provider for science content. So now, as you're starting to see this erosion of trust in media, museums can really, I think, rise up and start to fill a really unique role. But they got to be ready to do it, and they got to know what to do and how to do it, and culturally be ready to do it. I think we need to be thinking about transparency and trust in information. The more I hear about this at journalism conferences, especially with mobile devices and bots, and AI and bots are removing sourcing even more. So you just go up and say, Alexa, da-da-da-da, and you just get an answer. You don't get the clunky, well, as cited from the New York Times in 1992, da-da-da-da-da. You just get the answer. And now, how do you know? And what does that mean? That place-based digital is way more complicated than you may think, but you still need to think about it and understand it. But it's a lot of fun. I'm really, this Internet of Things, which is like the worst buzz term ever, because what is that? But we really are getting to that point where these walls are starting to come down, and people will be able to go up and touch a wall with their device. The NFC tag, you can just hold your phone over a little tag and it can communicate with your cell phone. If the phone can read it and the tag's coded properly, you can just go up and say, and scan it, and it gives you a piece of information and then saves it to your phone or adds something to your calendar. One of the really cool ones that we want to light up now that iOS 11 allows it, you can just hold your phone up to a tag and it auto adds you as a friend of ours on Facebook. You do not have to open, we don't have to tell you clunky, you got to go in, just follow us on Facebook, boop, done. So that's what we're starting to get into, is how this device starts to kind of follow you around, and how walls and buildings know you're there, and smart buildings and things like smart cities and all of that take off. This is going to get really super exciting. That's in a whirlwind, everything I've been working on, but I'd love to throw it out for questions, comments, feedback. That's me, and that's the Franklin. Anything? Yeah.
So virtual reality and augmented reality exhibits are super cool on their own, but obviously the content will get people to enjoy and think it's worthwhile. So how do you pick what in your museum you're going to spend time on creating this technology for? How do you pick the terracotta warriors as the augmented reality feature, or what do you decide to put in your virtual reality?
It's a really, really great question. Virtual reality was easy. We just didn't make any content. Literally, I went into Steam VR and I copied every single science-related title out of Steam VR, and then we bought them all and we tried them all. And if they were science-y, and this is where my museum educators start to cringe a little, because the VR experience was not meant, so on the HTC Vive, for example, has anyone here done the Vive's Blue Whale, the demo video that's in the Vive? It's amazing. It's their demo video. It's free. It comes with the product. That's what we show in the Vive. It doesn't require hand controllers, gives you an amazing VR experience. I'm not trying to teach you about whales. So it has a learning technology. This is where museums get a little bent out of shape. But how effective is it at teaching the public about whales? And I'm the person who goes, I don't care. I want them to experience VR. It's a technology experience. And so one of the things the Franklin Institute does really well is we work with a lot of lower income communities, bringing them to the museum. And so just the other night I was walking out of the museum past the holodeck, and there was a whole group of kids in the whale experience, and she's standing there. People talk about it being a group experience. So she's in the headset, and her friends can see what she's seeing, and she knows the whales behind her, and she's like, ah! And she just keeps turning around, and she's having fun doing it, and her friends are like, turn around, the whale's behind you. But how cool is that? That was her first experience with VR, and she had it at the Franklin Institute. And that is, I think, what technology museums and science museums should be about. So I think the content has to be good in the sense that it's a quality VR experience. We're not going to put first-person shooter games in there. But Google Tilt Brush, the painting app, we do that one because the art and the creation side, we created a virtual reality artist street team just kind of accidentally for that event. And now we upsell them for weddings. So you can add VR to your wedding reception at the Franklin Institute and hire an artist to paint on the ceiling of the planetarium. And then people get drunk and come back and try it themselves. We really didn't think that through. Mixing alcohol and VR was a whole other. I don't work those events. So far, I haven't heard any negative side effects. We've only done it a couple of times, but I have thought a couple of times, that that might be where we get the throwing up. Yeah. So the content on VR, anything sciencey related, that's a great experience. Mostly because it's cost prohibitive to make original content. It is. I don't have $200,000 to make new VR content. On the AR side, we got a grant. So that was the reality. Yeah.
Do you ever worry that as VR and AR gets more sophisticated, technologically advanced, that people might say we don't need to go to the museum anymore? We can just have that at home. Is there a plan for maybe staying ahead of the game in that case?
I actually feel the exact opposite. I think the more ubiquitous digital experiences get, the stronger people will want to come and see things in person, because you see it. I experienced it. So Terracotta Warrior is a great example. They were in Seattle, and I had been looking at them as 3D models, high-resolution 3D models, like every nook and cranny, for 2 months. And then I was there when they uncrated them, and you're standing in front of the actual statue. Doesn't compare. I mean, it will, and in fact, it actually enhanced that in person. So I do think it'll actually work in the opposite way. People will always have to leave the house, like always. But what they do when they get there, I think. So now, when I do say that in front of curators, they're like, well, that's the perfect reason to not do digital in museums, because people get it at home and they want to come here and not do digital. I'm like, yeah, yes and no. It's never, kind of a black or white, but yeah.
I kind of, I come from a perspective, I spent the last 25 years in isolated Alaska, where I was a teacher. And so I had kids who were 750 miles away from the nearest mall, and a lot of them had not ever left the island. And so for us, when we got cardboard and we were able to have that immersive experience with 7th graders, and all of a sudden they're in like the Neuschwanstein Castle in Germany.
Yep.
And exploring everything. I mean, what I would personally like to see is more outreach from museums to out-of-campus audiences. As long as the apps are being created and digital stuff is being done, it's sure nice for people who don't have access to those institutions to be able to see them from a distance.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I appreciate all the work you're doing.
No, thanks. No, I totally agree. I think VR has, is amazing at connecting communities. Also, especially when you get into shared VR, it's basically like teleconferencing on steroids. You can have kids meet each other in virtual experiences. I don't think what Facebook and Oculus are doing in that space. Did anybody see the really cartoony hurricane thing they did? It was awful, absolutely awful. Like, there's a place for emojis and not, and that was so not. And so this cartoony, there's this instinct to gamify VR all the time. And because the primary purchasing audience is gamers sitting in their basement. I think I'm sort of, what I go to content providers is there's a whole other audience out there you're missing, which is this place-based out-of-home VR or in school or things like that. I think Google does a lot on that. I will tell you, I'm a little not annoyed with Google, because you never want to say that out loud. Now that I have. Google likes to push Android, Pixel, whatever. 30% of my audience uses Android devices. So if it doesn't work on an iPhone, I ain't using it. So Tango, they come around and they promise free technology to schools and free technology to museums, but only if you use Tango, only if you use Pixel, only if you use Android devices. Not a fan of that. Yep.
Yeah, I guess then, so iOS just opened up Get User Media for Web AR, right? And so you have all these apps. What percentage of people are actually using the apps, downloading the apps that are coming through you? Do you have plans in the future then to glom onto this Web AR? Because then you don't have that sticking point of having them download the native app and just simply opening up a browser.
I mean, I think we went into the native app process knowing that it probably only had a 2 to 3 year useful life and that everything will eventually shift. I was very anti-native app when I went into this whole process, by the way. I mean, so much so in my interview with my current boss, he said, what about apps? I said, I won't do apps. We don't do apps. Native apps are dead. because I'd come from the content world, and content apps, which I believe is being presented this afternoon or in the other room right now, content apps are dead. It's all mobile web. It's all mobile, but whether it's native or mobile web is the question. What I discovered in the process is if you do want access to beacons, GPS, push notifications, calendaring, AR camera, you still need the native app. Like, it's just not there yet. So it was either wait 4 years or do something now and know that it was probably going to have to migrate off eventually.
Chris, have you done anything with Google Expeditions? We're talking about that. I think
Yes.
What the question that the teacher up here asked.
Mm-hmm. They've come down. So yeah, the Google Cultural Institute and Google Education has created a product called Google Expeditions where they will pay, especially in schools, they'll come to different institutions through the Google Cultural Institute. They'll bring the whole Google team. They're coming to our museum for free. They will scan and do everything internally. They'll do your interior space, and they'll create a 3D tour for Google Cardboard, and then they'll bring that to classrooms. So Google Expeditions does that with certain cultural spaces through the Google Cultural Institute. So we've participated in that, and they've actually been great. They do offer a lot of free resources in that for.
Yeah, the example I saw was connected to Chasing Coral at Sundance. It's a film that's on Netflix, and the filmmakers of that, basically to connect school kids with coral reef issues and global warming. You can have the teachers up there, and they get to choose where they're going in the coral reef, and you see that on their iPad. They say, okay, now put your cardboards on. They can push the right location of the 360 photo to all the students. And
Yep.
they're like, I see, a manta ray and things like that. And I think for terracotta warriors and all kinds of things, anything geography related.
Yep. I also. Some of the original, anybody here remember Gigapan when they were the original panoramic photo? There was a big robotic camera. Gigapan came out of Carnegie Mellon, and it was a really fantastic, one of the things that I really love talking about schools is connecting, using 360 to connect playgrounds in Illinois with Africa, and letting kids experience schools in totally different parts of the world and connecting kids through where they would here's our classroom, and then they would document their classroom and then actually get to stand in the other kid's classroom and interact, and the kids could tag different things so they could examine here's how we learn, here's how our teacher does different things, and then kids could learn from each other. I haven't seen that in VR. It probably exists, but I always thought that was a neat use of it.
Short of VR, I've been in a bunch of museums recently, and I, find myself looking up Wikipedia, and then sometimes the museum, to support, right? And sometimes a couple of museums I was at let me go down a rabbit hole of some sort to learn more because they had something I could press or additional material. A couple of them had, links on the wall and but it worked. But I felt like, boy, museums could really curate some of this better for me.
Yes.
So that I could really go deep. If I had a question about this, I could just stand there and go deeper, and it doesn't have to be museum curate. So are you doing any of this? Or?
Yeah, so what you're seeing is the intersection of traditional museum exhibition designers and their digital teams. So I've been living this for the last few months, and this is what happens. They design an exhibition to pulse a certain number of people through it. And the text on the wall is a certain length so that you can read it and move on, because they don't want you standing there because you're going to clog up the whole behind you. And they've got that down to a science. It really is amazing. They can put together an exhibition and pull 7,000 people a day through it, and it works like clockwork. And how do you bring digital into that in a non-disruptive way? So if we're dealing with this terracotta, they come in and all 10 warriors are in a big room. We actually clustered all of ours together. So the first one is not augmented. We went through that because there's a theater, there's the onboarding, where are they downloading the app, are they spending time in the theater? So this was annoying. Actually, what's happening is they're downloading the app in the theater and not watching the theater show, so the exhibition people are pissed. I'm happy. They didn't learn what they needed to learn, but they downloaded the app. So I was like, Square, and they're like, no. I was like, oh. And then the door opens and it reveals the first warrior. And we all decided that one's not going to be augmented because they want you to see the warrior and move on. what does everyone do that downloaded the app? They walk up and they just hold their phone up to it. And it's not, but we didn't put a sign there that said not augmented, and we're like, oh, damn. And so then they walk over and then they realize it's not, but now they're frustrated with the app. So now my exhibition person's super happy because they're walk-in, but now they hate the app because they think it's broken. So now they're walking to the next warrior, and now there's a little sign, but now instead of reading the sign, they're trying to figure out how to make the app work. It's probably at about halfway through the exhibition, they figure out the balance. And so that's just because we're not good at it yet, because we haven't figured out. Some people are trying to do it where you store all the information and it sends it to you at home. Smithsonian's Cooper Hewitt in New York does that. You're pretty much done. After you've spent 5 hours at a museum or 4 hours wrangling your kids, you're not going home and just waxing poetic about the brain. Like, I think if we don't get it to you in this interface, so I think it's getting to cleaner, faster interfaces. So that's why I think QR codes are back. I really do with the iOS 11. Because now that the camera can just read it, you don't have to download a native app. You just open the camera on your phone, which is probably open anyway because you were just taking photos of your kids, and then you just hold it up to the wall and a piece of content pops up that's about the size of a wall piece. You read it, and then you move on with your kids. So that's where I think we haven't quite figured out what that experience is. And it's, the challenge is exhibition people don't have the digital experience, and I don't know anything about moving people through a building. So we're really trying very hard to learn from each other. But it's fun. It's new. It's different. We learn something all the time. I'm not sure. It's a little painful though, because when I used to publish digital content, I never actually got to see what. You do focus groups or usability testing. It's so painful. You think you painstakingly put stuff on a page, and then they sit there in front of it and close the window, and you're just like, oh. Like they didn't even click on any of the stuff you thought. That's kind of what it's like watching people use digital in a museum. You're like, no. Like I'm walking behind them, I'm like, no, you got, okay. And then I go back to my office. Yeah.
So I have a question. When I think of museums, one of the things that comes to me is that a museum is a place for everyone, really, yep. Truly. What about the low-income communities that maybe cannot afford these expensive phones?
Yep. It's actually the opposite. Lower-income communities have a higher penetration of smartphones because it turns out to be their primary and only media consumption device. So it replaces cable television, it replaces every other subscription that we have. They just do the phone and get everything. So what you'll find, Pew's most recent study is, I think we're at 92 to 95% smartphone penetration in the US, but it's 95 to 96 in lower income communities. So I get that question quite a bit, and it's actually really, the biggest gap we see in accessibility is older retirees. So smartphone penetration in 65 and above or 75 above is only about 79 to 80%. It's still high, but or they're on flip phones, they're still on other things. So like the feedback we got from Terracotta Warriors, because the exhibit appeals to a certain demographic, they were very frustrated because a lot of them didn't have smartphones. So that was more of a barrier, I think, than lower income communities. Yeah. Which is really fast. The data on it from Pew about demographics and smartphone ownership is really fascinating. So, just on that point though, they don't have VR headsets. So when you're talking about a price point that's in the $4,000 or $3,000 or $2,000 if you throw the computer in, what I've loved is that this as a technology accessibility play, we're maybe the only place you get to experience VR for free, because you're definitely not buying that at home. So it's been really great for me to see that we're opening virtual reality up to a whole world that was never going to get access to it.
So you have your mic. Oh, sorry. You have a.
You push the button.
Thank you. Sorry. Anything with button. You have an IMAX there, right?
Yep.
So IMAX is now providing VR experiences, and they're charging for it at malls.
Yep.
Are they planning on doing that at museums? And if so, how does that fit in with your
It is one of the
strategy?
phone calls I want to make. So we are in a unique, I wish IMAX was calling us, to be frank, because We had one of the only dome IMAX theaters in the country in the 80s, and it's on film, which means that we're running out of things to show in it because it'll cost $3 million to upgrade it to a digital experience. We don't think that's necessarily worth the enhancements. So we've got this massive useless theater. It's really great because they only made 2 print editions of Star Wars, and we got one of them, and that was super awesome. It came on a big security-ridden truck with 3 huge reels, and each frame was like that, and we're like, and they had to piece it together and run some sound checks on it. So we get the only print versions of Star Wars, but other than that, it's not cool anymore. So what I would love to see is Magic Leap come out, and it's like 3D, experiences where we can use our existing space and turn it into a mixed reality theater, or turn it into a VR theater. So yes, I would love it if we would start, and I've thrown that out to our theaters group about that being another use of that space.
Yeah, and maybe 360 video too, if it's spherical.
Yeah, it's
And the museum is gonna do
planetarium.
that
So
pretty
this
soon,
is
I
a
believe.
whole other content outreach opportunity for VR content creators, planetarium domes and domed theaters. There aren't that many domed IMAX theaters, but planetariums are everywhere, and their experiences kind of suck. So planetarium shows in VR, and really thinking about, another group came to us, and they're working on the backpacks where it's shared VR. It's like mixed reality VR backpack. They were like, oh, well, where would we do this? I was like, well, our chairs are removable in our planetarium. So we turn it into a mixed reality pen, basically, where the doors close. We don't pad the walls, but there you go. That was one of the interesting things. It really is amazing to watch people use VR. I just think, sometimes I just go to the holodeck and I'll just stand in the back, and watching all ages use 360-degree media, not at trade shows. I really recommend, if you get the chance to do it. The mall is a weird environment because people are shopping, but inside a museum community, it's really fascinating just to see, some people, and I haven't been able, we should do a study on this, but we haven't, but like who looks around, standing immediately causes you to do this. Sitting, you just, stare straight ahead. But little kids, that 12 and under, they're immediately looking all around. But is that because they're more attuned to the 360 media, or it's just because they look all around and they're crazy anyway? It's difficult to tell. But it's really fun. Yeah?
I just wanted to say one thing we learned like in the first 2 minutes of using that with a group of kids. When we put the first cardboard on the first kid, he immediately wanted to wander, and he wandered right out the door, and right outside our door was a staircase. So from that point on, we went to a buddy system, where one person had the cardboard, another person was like watching, making sure that they weren't stumbling into anything, and then they'd switch over. Yeah,
people think of it, it's hyper realistic for a lot of people, that girl who was scared with the whale, it really just, it was a fun scared, but it was really fascinating to see how immersive it was and how powerful it was. So we also do International Space Station, Mission ISS. We're really lucky. There's a lot of amazing educational content on Steam VR already that's just free. And because we don't upcharge for it, we don't have any, so we don't sell, you have to buy a ticket to the museum, but we don't upcharge for VR, so we can use all of that license free. So that's pretty cool. All right, we're about at time. Any other questions? Yeah.
Are there any privacy issues in a museum for pinging and all that stuff?
Yes. It's probably the most heated debate among the museum community because, again, museums and libraries have this very traditional, some of it goes into, this idea that, we're trusted communities, so we shouldn't collect data and we shouldn't collect marketing data. And so, yes, it's a hotly debated topic that I don't think we have a whole lot of solutions on because you've got marketers who want to sell tickets to people and get membership and donors and and development, and then you have curators and privacy experts who are like, no, don't do any of that. We haven't butted up against it as a visitor issue. It's more of an administrative issue. So, all right, well, thanks very much, everybody.